I've been challenged to digitize a 60-weight design using only the supplies I have on hand. And well, challenge accepted. In this video, I'm going to give you 5 tips for working with 60-weight thread, as well as some tricks to get those perfect sew outs. The first thing I need to do is look through all of my supplies. And after searching through all of these boxes of thread, I only found 2 spools of 60-weight thread, and they were, well, on the machine. I also found some lightweight twill and some Madeira E-Zee cutaway backing. With these items, it was time to head to the computer and find a design. I was trying to find a good design that had some text incorporated in it, and well, I was striking out. Then I remembered I was watching some anime with my son, and they had a white rabbit character. And that got me thinking. And after some searching, I found that the original book, Alice in Wonderland, was in the public domain. After going over to the Library of Congress website and finding the book, going through some of the pages, there it was, the perfect design. And that's what sent me down the rabbit hole. I brought the artwork into my software and I scaled the small text so that it would be 3 millimeters tall. And I decided I would start working with the rabbit first. And I began digitizing this like a ribwork design. And as I got up here to the top side of the rabbit, and especially when I come in here to do this chain and some of this clock face, I really need to be cognizant of my stitch length. And that actually brings me to my first tip. When you're working with 60-weight thread, you can actually do a shorter stitch length than what's normally recommended. With 40-weight thread, you're given a stitch length of about 1.2 millimeters as kind of the shortest stitch that you want. And that's because of the needle size. So if we come over here to this diagram, we have a needle comparison, and we have a 0.7511 needle. And I say 0.75 because the 0.75 actually corresponds to the width, the blade width right here of the needle. So this needle is 0.75 millimeters wide. When it comes down into the fabric, it makes a little bit larger of a hole, and then the thread there also takes up and makes a little bit larger of a hole, so the fabric doesn't heal quite as well around it. Here we have a 65-9 needle, which you can tell that it's slightly thinner than the 75-11 because of the 0.65 millimeters wide. And when it comes down and it makes the hole, it makes a little bit smaller of a hole, so we're actually able to make a shorter stitch length. Right here I have about a 1 millimeter stitch length that I would recommend. You could go down to maybe a 0.9 or a 0.8 in some cases. It really depends on the fabric or the stabilizer. So I'm going to go ahead and continue digitizing with my artwork and finish up the rabbit. And when I'm digitizing, I'm actually looking at my stitch length here. You can see the length shown up on the screen. As I click on the nodes, it tells me approximately how far apart they are. Now this really becomes important when I do a cusp node or a straight node, because those are directions that the software has to change. And anytime the software has to make a hard change in a direction, it has to put a stitch there. So if I do a very short stitch length here, I have to be sure that I'm over that 1 millimeter or maybe 0.9 in some instances, because if I'm not, then the needle can go in the same hole, and too many short stitches can actually cause needle breaks, or they can cause bird nesting and issues like that on the machine, and we really don't want that. It's a little bit less important when I'm doing curved nodes, because as a curved node, the software doesn't necessarily drop a stitch right at every node. It will kind of calculate how many stitches to create that curve. And I'm just going to continue on down this chain here and continue around the rabbit. All right, now that I've finished the rabbit, I want to take this and I want to do a test sew. And that actually brings me to tip number 2. Always test. Whenever you're working with 60-weight thread or a different weight of thread, you always want to test your designs to make sure that they're turning out how you want them. This becomes more important when you're doing, let's say, small text or really fine details. You want to make sure that you're testing and that you're capturing this appropriately. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and I'm going to run it on the machine. After running this on the machine, I liked it so much that I actually decided to frame it and put it on my desk. Now we're going to move on to our text, and that's going to bring me to my first trick. So the trick is, if you take a artwork object and you can go here, you can draw a box that's roughly the size of your text, the full width. I'm going to take this box and I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to change the size to 0.12 in height. And that's going to give me a nice slim line that I can bring down here and I can set on the top of the text. And this is actually going to be for my push compensation, because we want to adjust for the compensation of the letters push and pull. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this object there, and I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to right click, and when I let go, it's going to copy the object, and I can just add that right there to the bottom of the screen. Now I want to do a column width, and this is actually another tip. So the tip is that when you're digitizing small text, you want to digitize it manually. Not only do you want to digitize it manually, but you want to use smaller columns than you normally use. For this text, I'm going to be going down to about a 0.9, 0.8 millimeter width column to be able to capture that detail and capture the space that's in the letters. I'm also going to be blocking out the text and removing the serifs, because serifs are very difficult to do at this height. Now, to do this small text with the column width and keep the column width consistent, another trick that I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to take this object and I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it, and we're going to make sure it's unlocked, and I'm going to do a 0.8 column width. So now I have another piece of art here that's 0.8 millimeters wide, and I'm going to bring that down so that the top and the bottom line up, and then I'm simply going to change the color of it so that way I can keep the two separate easily. Now I'm just going to click again, right click, and then when I let go, it's going to copy it down here at the bottom. I'm going to move it just a hair because I was off a little bit. There we go. And now I have my top column width, my bottom column width, and the rest of the column, the push and the pull for all of the columns. Now I'm ready to go ahead and begin digitizing the text. Before we get into our next tip, let's check out this free offer from Madeira, USA. We created a fully scalable native font. No dragging, no guesswork. Hand drawn with a hybrid block script style. It's playful, bold, versatile, and best of all, it's free. Check the link in the description. Our next tip is going to be to manually digitize the underlay. You want to manually digitize or reduce the amount of underlay that you have under your letters. This is due to the fabric that you're going to be sewing on. So if you're sewing on a very, very stable fabric, you may not need to do underlay, but you might have to adjust your density. If you're sewing on a less stable fabric, you're going to want to do underlay. I personally like to put underlay under everything, and so I'll manually be doing that here. And to do that, I take my manual tool. So this means everywhere that I click, I'm going to do a point, and I'm going to manually digitize my lock stitch. So I'm going to come here, 1, 2, 3, come back, and then I'm going to come down, and that's going to be my lock stitch. And then I can simply digitize the objects at the column width of roughly 0.8, and go through and manually digitize my text. Now, as we're moving through our text, you can see here that I made the O significantly larger. The reason for that is that letters like O, V, and A sometimes need to stand larger in the artwork. And so this is roughly about 3% larger, and that's to optically balance the letters. If you look at this when it actually sews out and you look in your word processor, O's are usually typically larger, so when you're digitizing them, you need to make them slightly larger to adjust for that optical balance. We're going to continue moving down the text here. Another trick I have is when you're doing columns like this, where I'm going to actually have two overlapping columns, I need to make sure that one of them ends a little bit shorter than the other. And the reason that I do this is as I come up, it's going to push. So this one's going to push down just a little bit further another stitch, and this one's also going to push. And offsetting these just a little bit doesn't make it so that it pushes too far. If I didn't offset them, I would actually have to bring them both up a little bit further and apply more push compensation than I would want to. And if I make any mistakes, I can always go in and adjust the nodes of each object. So I can simply just pull this down a little bit further to where I would like it to land. Now that I'm a little further through the text, I'm going to point out a few more things that I've done here that will help when you're trying to digitize 60-weight thread. Here, as you can see on this H, I have the T that comes up just a little bit right here, and then I have a run stitch that comes over. Now this run stitch is actually going to be the crossbar of that H, as well as I have it here at the center of the E. The H ends a little bit short right here and comes up, and the reason why I have done that is if I put the ending up here, it'll sometimes omit that stitch and it'll put a really long one, and it'll make the H look a little lopsided. Now I've got that there, and the H comes across there. You can see here that I've also dropped a single stitch across in the R, as well as used it as a crossbar of the A, and again in a couple of places here on the B. Finally, my next tip on this is when you're digitizing objects that have a vertical bar and a horizontal bar like the E or the B, we're going to go ahead and turn this off, and I'm going to grab these two objects here and I'm going to bring them up just a little bit so you can see a little bit better, and I'm going to turn off the stitches so you can see how these objects overlap. And the reason why I'm doing that is the angle here comes in a little less harsh and the angle here comes in a little less harsh, and it helps define this edge here and define this edge here and gives me just a little bit more space. I went ahead and I finished the text. Now the upper text I decided to space out and make a little bit larger and a little bit fatter so that I could preserve some of the serifs and try to make it a little bit more true to the art. After that, we can just take all of the text here and we can change the color of it. And this brings us to our final tip. When we're digitizing for 60 weight thread, we need to adjust our densities for it. So I'm going to grab this upper text up here and we'll go ahead and check our density, and right now it's at a 0.4. 60 weight thread is roughly 25% smaller than 40 weight thread, so we need to account for that in our digitizing. So I'm going to change this to a 0.35 density, which is going to help make these letters look fuller and how they're supposed to when they sew out comparatively with 40 weight thread. The lower text I'm going to change to a different density, and I'm actually going to have to filter out the artwork, the fills, the manual stitches, the run stitches, and the star tool here. So I'll go ahead and filter those out so that I'm only grabbing the satin segments. And here I want to do a density of about a 0.38. Because it's smaller text, when you do smaller text even with 40 weight, you reduce your density. So with small text, even in 60 weight, you also reduce your density just a little bit. From a 0.35, we're going to a 0.38, and that should give us the look that we're going for. Now that we've got all of this done, we can go ahead and throw it on the machine, sew it out, because remember, we always test, we never assume, and we'll sew it out and we'll take a look at the final results. And here's our final product. If we take a look at the stitch out here, the lower text came out really well. It all looks even and straight aligned, and you can see all of the gaps and all of the letters are legible. The upper text looks really good as well. I may increase the density on the H and possibly the T if I do another sew out. The detail on the rabbit looks fantastic, and it's an excellent example of what you can do with 60 weight thread. If you like our content, please like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next video. I'm Jeff from Madeira, USA.